we went over part 1 on the Tagalog. And today we're going to be going over the Bisayans. So the book that I'm using is the Verbal edition of the English translation of the Boxer Codex. If you don't already know, you can get this on Amazon for about $23, $24. All right, so let's start. So here are the chapters in the Boxer Codex. Actually, I think I missed a slide. Yes. So what is the Boxer Codex? So for those of you who are new and joining the series and did not join the class last week, basically the Boxer Codex is this manuscript that was found in 1947 by Charles Ralph Boxer, who placed a bid in an auction catalog on an anonymous 18th century manuscript on Asia. So this manuscript has 22 sections in various groups in Asia, written by several different authors. However, only 5 accounts have a name, the rest is anonymous. Out of the 75 illustrations in the Codex, 15 of them illustrate the early people of what is now known as the Philippines. And currently, this manuscript is held in the Lilly Library at Indiana University. So these are the chapters that focus on the Philippines. So we have the Cagayan, River Valley, the Sambal or Sambali in the Zambales region. The 3rd chapter is on the Visayans. The 4th chapter is on the Tagalog, which we did last week. And if you did not watch that, if you did not attend that class, the recording is up on the YouTube channel. And the 5th one is on general customs and rights throughout Luzon. And the 6th one is just general customs of the Moro within Luzon. So the Moros mentioned in the Boxer Codex is mostly dealing with those in Luzon, so the Kampampangans, the Tagalog, because during the time when the Spaniards arrived, they were celebrating, they were practicing a mix of Islam and the native beliefs. So here are some illustrations on the Visayans in the Boxer Codex. As you can see, they have several tattoos on here. They were known as the Pantados, which is the painted ones. And both men and women were heavily tattooed. I'll actually show you on one of the slides coming up on some of these tattoos. Okay, so they made an announcement on the chat. So they're going to be doing checkpoints today after class, and make sure to take your notes. So yes, so last class, I did create questions for the class, and we're going to go over those questions later on once the class ends. So feel free to take any notes. So here's another illustration on the Visayans. And here are the questions that we're going to be going over today. So the first one is, what is the Bisayan creation story? The second one was, who were the deities? The third question is, who were the first Bisayan ancestors? And the 4th question is, what were some of their customs? So feel free to take a photo of this slide on your phone. So as we're going through the slides and the class, you could just jot down notes, because we're going to be going over these questions, and I'm going to be asking everyone, to participate and give the answers to these questions. Okay. So here's the first page on the Bisayan chapter. So the Bisayans are accustomed to paint their bodies with some very elegant tattoos. They do this with iron or brass rods, the points of which are heated on a fire. They have artisans who are adept at this. They do this with such order, symmetry, and coordination that they elicit admiration from those who see them. These are done in the manner of illuminations, painting all parts of the body, such as the chest, the stomach, legs, arms, shoulders, hands, muscles, and among some, the posteriors. The women paint only the hands very elegantly. To the men, these paintings serve as clothing. So what they mean by that is basically the Bisayans, again, were heavily tattooed. You had to earn these tattoos. For men, you had to earn them, especially when they went out to war or in raids. For women, they were able to get these tattoos not just for beauty marks, but also for fertility. So in these illustrations over here, these illustrations are from the illustrations from the History of the Bisayans by Francisco Alsina. So this picture on the left with the couple right over here, it depicts Datu and his wife. And if you see over here right on the woman's hand, you can see a couple of those tattoos, like there are these very fine lines. You could see the tattoos on his legs over here. And then on this guy, he's just covered in tattoos from like head to toe. Like you can see some tattoos on his face. And on the photo on top, these are just a couple of illustrations of these motifs. So we have representations of the snake scale or the python. And then we also have some representations of the crocodile skin. So the snakes and the crocodiles were one of the two more sacred animals in Bisayan folklore. Both of them are connected with the ancestors. There's different beliefs in both. They also consider, the crocodile like kind of like a god in a way. So they would give offerings whenever, they saw the crocodile. And basically, they're also connected with water. So in terms of water, there's this belief that through following a river, they're going to the afterlife. So if you look at some of these artifacts, such as the Manungal jar, which I've talked about in one of my previous classes, these jars depict these souls that are on these jars on a boat crossing a river. And there's some type of spirit or a deity that is bringing those souls to the afterlife. And the snake and the crocodile is associated with that. Okay. And if you want to learn more about traditional Filipino tattoos in general, I highly recommend picking up Manong Lane Wilkins' book. I'll type it in the chat. It's called Filipino Tattoos, Ancient to Modern. And he goes in depth on, the history of the traditional tattooing and things like that. So I'm just going to type it in the chat. Okay. So next page. Oh, wait, hold on. So I'm actually going to skip a couple of paragraphs in here so we're not here too long. So I'm going to read right over here this last sentence. So these are closed, these are closed at the front. The men carry on their heads some very fine multicolored headscarves, which they wear as some sort of Turkish turban. They call these in their language porones. This is actually porong or patong, and that's the headwear that these guys are wearing right around their head. And they certainly are nice looking and elegant. The young men wear them very finely with many inserts of strips of gold. The garments and dresses of Bisayan women consist of some blankets with diverse colored stripes made of cotton, and others are made from a plant they have. Some wear plain taffeta and damask that come from China. These are made as follows. A blanket is sewn in such a way it becomes like a big sack of wheat with two openings. The head is placed through one opening, folding it down to the waist with both openings of the blanket falling below. A slip knot with the same blanket is made above the waist by grasping it since it is very wide to be able to make the knot. So this skirt that they're talking about that the woman wore, it's basically the malong. If you do not know what the malong is, it's just basically a tube skirt. It's there's like two openings on the skirt and you would just roll it down and tie it in a knot. So we're gonna go down over here. So when they go out, they bring a shawl-like wrap made of white cotton, some of colored taffeta. When the women leave their homes to visit others, they walk very slowly, making 1,000 movements with their body with one sleeved arm upraised because they consider it fashionable to do so. The men likewise do so, and if belonging to the Principalia, the women wear crowns and garlands on their heads made of tinsel imported from China, and sometimes when they do not have these, they wear garlands made out of roses and flowers from the fields. So, sorry, my dogs are barking outside. So besides wearing these crowns and garlands, they made like these wreaths around their head made of roses and flowers. So the closest thing I could describe it as is like if you've seen the Polynesian Hawaiian like wreaths around the head made with like the leaves and some flowers, they did the same thing as well for like decoration. So this is just a little bit intro of how the Bisayans looked like. Now we're going to go into the Bisayan creation story. So we're going to start over here where it's highlighted. They say that before there was land, there was only the sky and the sea that existed from all eternity. And there was a bird that used to fly always between the sky and the sea without finding a place to rest. This bird was a bird of prey, which tired of continuous flying, determined to make the sky and the sea quarrel so that it might thus find some place where it could alight and rest. And this illustration over here on the right is actually depicting the first man and woman in the Bisayan creation story. Okay, so because there was no place for it in the sky nor in the sea, flying upwards toward the sky, it told him that the sea wanted to rise and submerge the sky with water. And the sky told the bird that if the sea did it so, it would hurl over its waters many islands and rocks in such a way that the waters would never reach the sky and could never harm it, because with the islands and rocks, the sea would have to go around them and would not have space to rise against the sky, as it said, nor raise itself, because the great weight of the islands and stones would hamper it. Upon hearing this, the bird descended to the sea and said that the sky was very angry and wanted to throw many large islands and rocks of great weight. Hearing from the bird that the sky wanted to throw things at it, the sea became so angry that it started rising and increasing and ascending with such force and determination to submerge the sky, so that the sky began to fear and to raise itself higher so as not to become submerged, so that the sea raised itself with greater force and fury and tried to go higher. The sky began throwing down many large rocks and many islands, and with their weight, the sea began subsiding to its original level. And with the islands and the rocks that the sky had hurled, the sky could no longer rise, leaving the sky very happy in its same place because of what the bird had done. So basically, they're talking about the formation of the islands. Then later, when the bird saw the earth rising from the sea, it flew down very happily, having found a place to rest from its continuous flight. And while resting on the land, it saw a piece of bamboo floating on the waters. This had 2 nodes and was being carried by the undercurrent to the shore where the bird was perched. The undercurrent always drove the bamboo forward until it hit the feet of the bird. And although the bird moved elsewhere in order to avoid being hit, the bamboo still went to the bird where the bird was, hitting and hurting its feet. For this reason, the bird began to peck vigorously at the bamboo until the nodes split open. And later, a man appeared from one of the nodes and a woman from the other. They became the first man and woman in the world. The man was called, so over here, this is a Spanish translation, but it's Sikalak or Silaki. And the woman was Kabai or Sibai. And for which the Bisayans say was the origin of the names of man and woman, which among them in their language are called lalaki and babae. So this is where we get the terms lalaki and babae from the first man and woman. So this came from the first man and woman who emerged from the 2 nodes of the bamboo, which the bird had split open. They also say that after the man and woman had come forth from the 2 bamboo nodes, the man told the woman that they would marry each other in order to multiply and have children. The women did not want to be married, saying that it was not the right that they should marry because they were siblings. So in order for them not to be punished, they went to these different animals. So it says over here on the last 2 sentences that if they were married she believed that they would be punished by the gods Magwayan and Malaon, for these were the names of their chief gods. So these are the, this illustration, it depicts Magwayan, but it also depicts Kaplan. So in other historical texts, it mentions Magwayan and Kaptan as the two primordial deities in the Bisayan creation story. In this account in the Boxer Codex, instead of Kaptan, who is the primordial sea god, they list Malaon. And on the next slide, I believe I wrote down the names for these deities. All right. So before we continue in the creation story, so here are a couple of the deities. So Magwayan is a primordial goddess of the sea. She ferries the dead to Sulad, which is purgatory, on their boat across the spiritual river called Lalangban. Meanwhile, Kaptan or Makaptan is the primordial god of the sky. Now in the Boxer Codex, instead of, like I said, instead of Kaptan, it's Malaon. Malaon was actually also known as Laon. And Laon was one of the supreme deities along with Kaptan. And she was a supreme deity and goddess of agriculture. The other names that she was known as was Maka Patag, Laoncina, and Raom. So there's variations, like slight variations within the Bisayan creation story. For the most part, it is pretty much the same. So one of the other variations, instead of the bamboo, I believe in Leyte, it was actually 2 coconuts. So it's the same creation story, but just different variations as you go across the different Bisayan islands. All right, so let's continue with the creation story. So the woman not to have any fear because of that, meaning having any fear from being punished by Magwayan and Malaon. They would very well get married, and to know, one second. Okay, and to know if the gods would get angry or not, they would ask the fishes in the sea whether or not the gods would be offended by their marriage. And agreeing on this, they asked the tunas, who replied that the pair could very well be married and not to fear punishment from their gods, because the tunas had also married despite being siblings. And because they had not been punished by the gods for it, they said it was okay. Although the woman saw and understood this, she still did not want to marry her brother for fear of displeasing the gods. So the man again said that for the greater assurance of knowing whether or not they can be married, they decided to ask the doves, which the birds. And as you can see, they're representing the sky and the sea. So the first one was the fish representing the sea, and the doves representing the sky. So the doves gave the same reply that the tunas had given, saying that it was well that the pair would marry and beget many children because they themselves had done so. And although they were siblings, the gods had not been displeased. Despite hearing all these words, the woman resolved not to marry for fear of their gods. So she then said that if she was to marry, it would be after asking one of their own gods. And if he said yes, then she would be married in no other way. So the man agreed that to ask one of their gods, the god Linog, which is the earthquake. And having asked him, he replied and said it was proper for both of them to get married and enlarge the world with, all their children, and they would not be punished by the gods. So with the assurance of one of their gods, Linog, and all, the fishes and the birds, they finally married. So Linog here is mentioned as a male deity. However, according to Francisco Osina, it was actually a goddess. So Linog is the goddess of the earthquakes. And all the various historical accounts that mention the Bisayan creation story mention Linog. So again, the deity who married Silaki and Sibayi, according to Francisco Osina, was Linog. In his account, Linog caused the earthquakes through the movement of her breasts, which were very large. So that was the belief of Linog. Today, Linog is still the same word to refer to earthquakes. Okay, so we're going to continue on a little bit. So it said that a little later, the woman became pregnant and gave birth to a number of boys and girls. They stayed in the house and did nothing to support themselves, much less their parents. Thus, their parents became angry at the children and decided to throw them out of the house. So one day, the father arrived, pretending to be very angry, and entering the house, he caught them all playing and idling. He took a stick and began shouting at the children, giving them to understand that he was going to kill them. The children fled, not wanting to wait for their father, seeing him angry and fearing that he would kill them. Separating from one another as best as they could, many ran outside the house and others entered the bedroom of the house. Some remained in the main living room and others went to the kitchen and hid themselves between the pots and chimneys. So this last passage is actually talking about several things. So as you continue reading on, I'm not going to go over that part of the creation story, but it's going over the different social classes. So in this illustration over here are a couple of the social classes. So there's the Lakan or the Raha or the Datu, which are basically like the chiefs of, the community. And then there was the Timawa, who were the free men. And then there is the Oripon, which were the slaves. And there was even a more like further on of like the social hierarchy within the Oripon. I'm not going to go over this. You could read this by yourself. Be posting when I post the PowerPoint. So I'm going to skip the first paragraph over here and go to the second part of the creation story. So they also say that the reason why the dead do not return to this century is because one of their ancestors, once more, people began to appear. He's actually making fun of them. The author who wrote this account was making fun of that. But anyway, so because of one of their ancestors called Pandaguan, who say was the first to invent the art and method of fishing and made traps in the sea for this purpose, caught a shark in one of his fish traps. When it was brought ashore, it died, and he offered obsequies to it as if it were a human being, and for this the gods got angry at him and sent a bolt of lightning from the sky, which killed Pandaguan. After his death, the gods took him to heaven and conferred with him, and 30 days after his death, they sent him back to earth to live. And during the 30 days that Pandaguan was in heaven and out for this world, his wife called Lapluban lived with someone named Marancon, believing that Pandaguan would not come back to this world. So basically, what they're mentioning here is why people die, basically, and don't come back to life. So by giving these offerings to the shark, Pandaguan kind of angered the deities, and they sent a bolt of lightning to him. He died, and he stayed in basically purgatory, which is called Sulad. I'm going to go over a little bit on Sulad and Saad in a moment when we go over the Paganito. But after feeling pity for him, the gods brought him back to life. So when he was brought back to life, Panaguan went to his son, Anranor, who was the first person to see him when he returned back into the world. He asked basically to see his wife. So Anranor went to his mother saying, she was not home. So Anranor was told to look for her and inform her that Pandaguan had been resurrected and that the gods had sent him back to earth and he was waiting for her in the house. Lupluban at the time was in the house of her friend, Maracon, relaxing after a meal of pork, which Maracon had stolen, for which the Bisayans believe that this Maracon is the inventor of thievery. When the son told Lupluban to return to their house because Pandaguan had been resurrected and sent him to call for her, I'll continue with that in a minute, because he wanted to see her, Lapluban became angry with her son Anranor, remonstrating harshly and forcefully, accusing him of lying what he told her, telling him to leave and say nothing more of it. She insisted that Pandaguan was already dead, that he was not going to return because the shark who was killed and rendered as a sacrifice had not come back to life. So basically what she was saying is that she didn't believe her son, that Pandaguan came back to life because the shark did not come back to life. So with this reply, Pandaguan's son told him that his mother did not want to come back because she did not believe that he came back. So, distraught on this, Pandaguan went back to Sulad, and that is where he stayed. So I'm going to go back. So this chart right here is a chart on the first ancestors, the first Bisayan ancestors, like the genealogy of them, starting from Sikalak or Silaki and Sikabay or Sibai. So in the creation story, they had many children. 3 of them are named. So the first son was Sibo, the first daughter was Samar, and then we know of Pantaguan, who was the inventor of the fishing net. And Sibo and Samar had their own daughter, which was Lapluban, and she married her uncle Pantaguan. So Lapluban is actually the woman who created the laws with her grandson Panas. So this included laws following mourning of the dead, weaving, dealing with crime, debt, etc. And their son, they had their son Anranor. He married some unknown woman. We don't know her name. And he had 2 children, Panas and Mangaran. So Panas is the inventor of war and weapons among the Bisayan beliefs. He declared war on his brother Mangaran on account of an inheritance. And this war became the first war, and Panas became the first woman to use weapons in fighting. Okay. So now continuing on, now we're going to actually talk about how the Paganito or Maganito started. So from that time on, all who died went to hell, which we have said is called Sular, which is actually Sulad, not Sular, Sulad. Until among them, there was a woman called Sibai. Others call her Sibai Omestacion. So right now, I still haven't determined the actual name, like the name for this one. But it was Sibai, who is said to order sacrifice made to their gods so that the spirits of those who died would not go to hell, but would be sent to a certain part of those islands, in the most rugged mountains where they would not be seen by any living person and where they were in life regaled and feasted. About the sacrifice invented by this woman, we should later give more details. They call this in their tongue Maganito. So the Maganito or Paganito are basically the rituals that were done to give offerings to the Anito and the Duwata, which are the deities. So this ancestor, Sibai, who I believe is actually the first woman, in the creation story, she started telling the people to give these offerings so that those who were stuck in Sulad, which is purgatory, they would go to Sa'ad, which is the final resting place. And there's other deities associated with this, such as Bandaki, who they pray to in order to redeem those souls. I will talk more about the various other Bisayan deities that are not mentioned in the Boxer Codex later this week on my other class. Okay. So they invoke their gods, or better, they invoke the gods with certain superstitious words and gestures that they have, using their own hands and a lance. They kill a pig, cutting off its head, they set it apart from the rest of the meat, and no one present touches it, except for the priest performing the sacrifice, or Maganito, as they call it. So this passage right over here that's highlighted, the first one, is just basically talking about how the Babaylans did their Maganito or Paganito. So it is said that the head is for the gods and that nobody should touch it except he who was making the sacrifice. After the sacrifice, he eats it alone, and the rest of the meat is divided among all those present at the sacrifice, who eat very splendidly and drink a certain liquid made from rice. So there's, depending on the text and depending on the group, the way that they did the offering. So they would not touch the offerings that were given to the Anito and Duwata. Usually the Babaylan would take whatever's being offered and no one would touch it. On the groups, based on texts, they would eventually eat it as, so it doesn't go to waste, but for the most part, they left it alone. So this sacrifice is what they're accustomed to make when someone is sick, and they ask the gods to give them health and knowledge. If this sacrifice is acceptable, they do this, those holding the priestly office, or the babaylan, of the pig that has been killed, placing on the floor an earthen pot, while ringing some bells and making a lot of noise, chanting songs, and doing other things with joy and merriment. With the sick man for whom the sacrifice is being made present at all the time, scattering on the floor much of the drinks that they have. And they say that what they scatter are the drinks for their gods, invoking also their ancestors. They are certain that their elders will favor them and give them good health because they are also regard their ancestors as gods. So for the ancestors, there was the belief in the deities and the belief in the ancestors. Some of these deities were deified, some of these ancestors were deified deities, deified ancestors, I mean. And they would give these libations of drinks during these paganito. And they would also, dance around, sing songs, chant, songs, things like that. So for this purpose, another sacrifice is held and a drinking feast with many invited guests, invoking the devils with words they are familiar with, asking for the well-being of the spirits, all those who are buried there, to let them out of hell and carry them to the high and rugged mountains, which is, again, the mountains is Sulad. When they mean by mountains, so depending on the ethnic group, there was certain places where they went to in Sulad. So for those who were from Cebu and Bohol, they went to these mountains in Borneo. And for the rest, they went to Mount Madyas. So they went to these mountains and they celebrated with their ancestors and having these feasts and drinking. So think of basically the Vikings, in Valhalla, they would celebrate and have these feasts with their ancestors. It's very kind of similar to that. So now we're gonna go over some of the omens. So on leaving the house for some place, if one of them sneezes, they turn back and for some time before going again and proceeding what they were going to do. And when they go to some place outside of their village to trade or to make war or something else, they cast lots with the eye teeth of crocodiles, for which they use for this purpose. To find out what they intend to do, they use these crocodile teeth. And if it appears that all will go well, they proceed. But first they indulge in 2 or 3 days of drinking, having a feast, and this is basically how they went to war. And if the omen is not good, they desist or wait a few days until good luck comes. So they would use the crocodile teeth as like a form of divination. So in terms of their oaths, these words are usually said in the belief that these are a great oath and that whoever says them would not lie. May the sun rend me asunder, may I go with the sun, or may I die with it, or with the crocodile or reptile. May they eat me if what I say is not truth. So again, the crocodile is very important. This next passage, so they are certain that the spirits of all those who die from being stabbed, eaten by some reptile or wild beast from either land or sea, struck by lightning or other similar deaths, go to heaven with their gods and not to the high mountains, which we have said were those who die from, just general sickness. They say that these dead ascend to heaven through the rainbow that appear during rains, and they value and esteem these highly, saying that those who died in this way are very brave. So for the rainbow, they believe that the rainbow was one of their gods, Barangao. So he's the god, the rainbow, and he's actually one of the 3 war deities, along with Tanginid and Makburakbak. So they believed that, when the rainbow was seen as a bridge to the Duwata, and those souls, again, who were stabbed, eaten by crocodiles, pierced by arrows, were able to cross that rainbow bridge. And these were the deified ancestors that joined the realm of the gods. because these were considered honorable deaths. Another belief in the rainbow was basically it was rude to point your finger in the rainbow because it was a great duwata that was being born. And even today, they still believe that, pointing to the rainbow was, considered bad. I'm just trying to keep in time right now. Okay, so the Bisayans wear their hair very long, men as well as women. The men and women have many holes in their earlobes, and in these openings, they place many objects and gold ornaments that are made very exquisitely. As they have among them many gold artisans who do filigree work expertly. Some pieces look like roses, and these are worn only by women and are called pamaras. Others are like round rings worn by men and women, who call them panicas. So some wear 3 or 4 pairs of such rings in their ears, which they can do because they have so many holes in their ears. So here are a couple of earrings that have been excavated throughout the Philippines. This big one right here on the top right, that's how big one of these earrings were. The one on the bottom left, I mentioned it in my last class. This is actually of the Garuda, which is a Hindu and Buddhist deity. The one in the middle, it's not, obviously an earring, but these were actually the funerary masks. So when they would bury the dead, sometimes they would bury them with these funerary masks, and they would cover the face with these masks. Now on the right, the bottom right, this is actually either a babaylan or it was an actual goddess. They don't really know what it represents. But you could see like the headwear over here. And basically they are raising their hands. So I personally believe this is a depiction of a babaylan, just because, they're waving, like raising the hands in the air, like they're praying. And the babaylan did have these headdresses, these elaborate headdresses when they did the paganito. All right, so now we're going to be talking about their boats and some of their weapons. So the weapons these people are accustomed are using daggers. They have wooden shields, which they cover their bodies when fighting. They also have lances, whose iron tips are sometimes laced with poison, which is plentiful in all the Philippine islands. In some of these islands, they use blowguns, like those in Spain, which they kill with birds. And with these, they shoot some very small arrows with very sharp iron points. And these arrows were also laced with poison. This actually kind of applies to one of the other war deities. So Naginid is the goddess of war. She's also the goddess of poisons, charms, oils. So, in war, they would use poison in these instruments. So they have shields made of rattan. In some areas, they wear on the head some helmets that are made of fish skin that are very strong. They have corsets made out of buffalo skin and some made of skin from elephants, which can be found in an island called Jolo, although they are not as large as those in India. So many, currently there are no native elephants in the Philippines, but back when the Spaniards were still there were some populations like in Mindanao. And there also have been, prior to that, there have been excavations of elephants throughout the Philippines, so they did exist. So they had many types of ships of different shapes and names with which they wage wars and go sailing. These are for the most part small and are used for war and depredation. These are called barangays, which the larger ones are called vireyas. They're very large and wide. One of them can fit 50 people, and if larger, 100. And everyone on board has to row except the chief. So basically, I'll show you a picture of this. So this warship is actually called the Caracoa. And as you can see on these two pictures, like this illustration on the bottom right is actually an illustration from 1711. of the Karakoa, the warships. And if you see the two photos on top, this is actually from one of GMA TV's shows called Amaya. Amaya was pretty much like the first Filipino drama series that depicted the pre-colonial history and culture of the Bisayans. And it's just one of my favorites. Like, I love it. But yeah, so they did actually replicate the Karakoa in this picture on the top right, and they would just row on these ships, and they would row across, you know, the different islands, and they were also known to even raid in China. So I'm actually going to skip these. I left these here. Basically, it's just going over some of their games, some of their like practices within trade. I'm not going to go over that. You could read that when I post the presentation. And this one that's highlighted basically, so for women, they were able to control their bodies, unlike now. So for the Bisayans, they considered having more than one child kind of bad. So they basically only wanted one child or two children, but no more than that. Because more than that, they considered that it would be bad because in terms of inheritance. So they did practice abortion, things like that. And they would get the babaylan to help them with that. Okay, so I'm going to skip the page on the left. We're going to move to the right-hand one. So this is a reasonable wine with which they get drunk, which they ordinarily drink is wine from rice that they call pang-asi. So pang-asi is one of the alcoholic drinks that were also used as offerings within the paganito. So when they make friends with those whom they are at war or with others, some are accustomed to take a little blood from their arm or another part of the body and give it to drink to those who wish to become their friends, and others do likewise. And in this way, they say that peace and friendship are forged perfectly and that this bond will not break. So in terms of like celebrating with others, especially when the datus or the rajas were having these like agreements with another datu or whatever, they would have these blood compacts. So basically they would prick, you know, some blood from the other person, pour it in the alcoholic drink or the pangasi, and they would share this drink. So they were sharing, you know, like the drop of blood from each other. One of the most famous ones is with Magellan and what's his name? The Raja of Cebu. So that's one of the famous ones. So now we're going to talk about another custom. So they're accustomed to blacken or redden their teeth, doing it precisely with a certain juice or herb that they're used to swelling in their mouths. Some have teeth enclosed in gold. The women wear gold studs on their teeth that are set like Merlin's. The gold is set well in the teeth that it appears it has grown together with the teeth. So basically it looks like this. So throughout the Philippines, they practiced this thing where they would stain their teeth. So it was either black or red. They would also file their teeth. So these are terms among the Visayans. So Sanka was the actual tooth filing. And over here, they use various herbs to color their teeth. And, you know, besides other teeth, they also did like their fingernails and things like that. And the gold teeth work, so they would put these gold like stuff on their teeth. And if you could see on the picture over here, this is of the Balinao skull, which was found in Pangasinan. And they have these different like variations of how they place these gold ornaments on their teeth. And on the picture over here, this is of a Bagoba man with, you know, the filed teeth. So pusad was the general term for gold teeth work. Halop was this type of like, you know, gold ornamentation on the teeth. And bansil were the gold pegs that were inserted in holes and just basically drilled into the teeth. Now this last page is a bit more sexual. So, you know, but basically they would place these things over here. So I'm just gonna go back to the last page. Hold on. All right. So yeah, so the men commonly place and wear on their genital members a certain wheel or ring with rounded spurs in the form drawn on this page margin. So it's this right here. You can see it on the gold illustration on this page. So made of lead, brass, and in some cases gold. They have holes in the round part of the wheel or ring, one in the upper and the other in the lower part, through which they put a small pin or nail of the same metal as the ring, and with which they pierce the lower part of the prepuce, and thus the wheel or ring is placed on the very genital in the same way that a ring is put on the finger. Thus they have, they have sex, and basically they remain there, like, how dogs basically take time to like leave. They had to wait until, yeah, you can read that yourself. But basically they had these things. This was actually a practice that was done throughout, Southeast Asia, and we do have a couple of these ornaments that were recovered. And you can see these things over here. So what they were called were sukras. And basically, I was actually reading this the other day. It may have actually also been a religious thing, because the word itself comes from the Sanskrit word chakra. I'm actually just still reading about that. But yeah, it could have also been a religious thing other than, pleasure. All right, so that's it on the Bisayans. So here are the questions again. So what is the Bisayan creation story? Who were the deities? Who were the first Bisayan ancestors? And what were some of their customs? So if anyone wants to answer the first question, just like to talk a little bit about the Bisayan creation story. Anyone?
So hold on, I wrote this down. Where'd it go? So basically the sea and the sky were fighting, and the sea wanted to rise, but the sky was like, if you do that, then I'm gonna throw islands and rocks at you. Oh, I completely forgot about the bird. There was a bird.
Yes.
And yeah. And then where was it? So the bird carried the message from the sky to the sea about the rock throwing and the island throwing. And the sea got really mad and started to rise, right? And the sky saw that and started throwing the islands and the rocks, and that was the formation of islands, right?
Yep.
So then the bird was able to land, and there was a bamboo. I was like writing, so I didn't write a little bit of it, but I remember there was a
No, you're
bamboo,
correct.
and then sometimes in other stories you said it's a coconut instead.
Yes, 2 coconuts.
And the bird was like pecking at it, and there out came the first man and woman, right? Where was I? Yep, man and women. And then I feel like I'm missing something, but then I have that the man was basically convincing the woman to marry. But she was scared that they would get punished if that would happen. So they talked to, I think it was the tuna. Is that right? About getting married just to see if they would get punished, and the tuna was like, no, you're good. But the woman still wasn't convinced, so they talked to, it was the doves, right?
Yes.
Yep.
They said the same thing, and then I think that's all I have so far. Hold on a second. Wait.
Oh, they
I feel like
also
I was
asked.
going on, but
Oh, Jamie, you wanna add on?
Yeah, I am just frantically skipping my
No.
copy of the Boxer Codex, and it's like, let's see. Right after they asked the doves, the woman still didn't want to marry just in case, incest.
Mhm.
So they asked the god of earthquakes, Linuk. And Linuk told them, "Yeah, you're fine. The gods won't be angry if you get married because you're like, it's okay for you guys right now." So then they finally got married.
Yep, that's good. Yep. So that's like the first part of the long Visayan creation myth. So when we talk about the Visayan creation myth, it's like at one time it was this very like long epic. And in terms of epics, they would recite these for like hours basically. And when they do these epics, when they would say them, they wouldn't just like make a paragraph of it like so and so did this. They would actually repeat things, so it was repetitive. Along with the creation stories and epics, there were also like metaphors. So in terms of the Bisayan creation story, it's basically a metaphor of how the first ancestors arrived on the islands via boats. So the bamboo itself is a representation of the the boats that they used to sail to these islands. And the islands itself, like with the sky and the sea and the bird, when you're actually going, out on sea, you would follow these birds. If the birds found land, basically, yeah.
The
So
shorebirds.
yes. So for example, like I think they showed this in Moana actually, right? I don't remember.
They did.
Yeah. So it depicts that, and basically they would follow these birds to the islands, and that's basically the metaphor on that first part of the creation story. And in terms of the bamboo reed, it also kind of actually applies to one of the other deities. I will explain this more when I go over the Bisayan deities. But one of the gods that was mentioned in the Bisayan creation story was Magwayan. Now, Gwayan is actually a term for bamboo. So there's Kawayan and there's Gwayan, depending on the ethnic group. So based on that, if you know who Magwayan is, based on the creation story with the bamboo, and knowing besides being the primordial deity of the sea, we know that Magwayan was the one who ferried the souls on a boat. And again, the bamboo is a representation of the boat. So when in the creation story, basically they're finding life, they're finding their journey to these islands and being born through water, through the boat. Then when you die in the afterlife, you're being led by one of the deities or a spirit in other ethnic groups on a boat across a river. So it's like a circle, like of life. And when you think of it in actual terms, when you are actually born, you are in fluid. You're in, when you're still in your mom, it's through fluid. So it's kind of like the metaphor, basically through the creation story. And when you look at these epics, the Spanish also mentioned this. So they spoke in like two languages, the main spoken language and the figurative language that they used when they were talking about their myths and epics. And in order to understand those epics and creation stories and myths, you had to understand the figurative language. So there is another part of the Bisayan creation story. Does anyone want to talk about that one after, so we'll talk about after, all the children were born, and things like that. There is another part of the Bisayan creation story regarding a couple of their children, and how the Maganito or Paganito was created. So if anyone wants to talk about that, if they have in their notes, does anyone?
I do it's like Nope. No, I like. No, I do not.
Is this the part
apparently.
with the shark?
Yes. So it
Okay.
starts from the one with the shark.
So I
Like, or shark.
they gave, oh, I'm gonna mess this up. Pandaguan,
Pandaguan.
Pandaguan.
Oh, like blood or okay. Oh.
Um, I mixed it up. They gave him offerings, or he was the one who gave offerings?
So Pandaguan, he was one of the children of the first, men and women, si Kalak or si Bai. He's the one who gave the offerings, like these offerings to the shark because it died. So the shark was the first death in the world.
Okay.
Okay.
Meanwhile, Pandaguan was the first human death in the world. So when Pandaguan gave these these rites, and kind of like got angry at the gods for letting the shark die, the gods got mad at him and they sent lightning to kill him. And he stayed in purgatory, which is called Sulad. And he stayed there for 30 days, right? Basically a whole month, or because they considered from moon to moon, right?
Yes.
As a month. So they did that. And after a while, after that whole month, they felt pity on him and they brought him back to life. And then after that, he sent his son Anwanor to fetch his mother, Lupluban. So does anyone remember who Lupluban was?
She was the daughter of the. Oh wait, yeah, it was daughter, right? She was the kid of the first son and the first daughter, right?
Can you repeat that again? Sorry, I was typing in the chat.
She was the kid of the first son and the first daughter, right?
Yes.
Like,
so yeah, so she was a child of Sibo, who was the first man, and Samar, which was the first daughter. I mean, yeah, the first son, the first daughter. But what was she known as in terms of inventing?
She came up with the laws, and these laws were how they would mourn for the dead, and
Yep, you're right. So basically, all the laws within they followed, she's the one who created them along with her grandson Panas. So now we're going to go over Panas. So who was Panas?
They invented weapons, and they declared war, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, on his brother, over inheritance. And then Pandaguan, so besides giving the offerings to the shark and being the first person to die, what was he known as? What did he invent?
The fishing net.
Yes. So were you in my class for the part 1 in the Boxer Codex? Yeah. So for the Tagalog, who was the inventor of the fishing net for them?
Wait.
It was one of the gods.
I'm pretty sure it was Mansinaya.
Yes, good. So,
sea god.
yeah,
Okay.
so for the Tagalog, they believe that one of their gods, Amansinaya, was the one who invented the fishing net and the art of fishing. For the Visayans, it wasn't a god, it was one of the early ancestors, so it was Pandaguan. And let's see, what else in the creation story? So further on into the creation story, how did the first Paganito or Maganito start? So what is a Paganito? What is Maganito, Paganito, basically?
It's a ritual to it's a ritual to honor the Anito, right? Or the Dewata.
Yes. Yep. It's to offer, give offerings to the Nito and Duwata. And speaking of Paganito, we're actually going to be doing a Paganito this Saturday. Yeah, so for the full moon. So I will be teaching more on a class for the Paganito. and how to do one, the different types that were mentioned in historical texts. But after that class, we are going to be actually doing a paganito ritual for the full moon and the Duwata themselves. Because for the Visayans and other ethnic groups, they believed that the full moon was actually the time when the Duwata came down to earth. So we're going to be doing that on Saturday. So who was the one who created, the first paganito?
This could be wrong.
I'm pretty sure I'm gonna say it wrong. Sibaye.
Nope, it's Sibai.
Sibai.
So in my personal opinion, I actually do believe Sibai that is mentioned in there is referring to the first woman. The other name that's mentioned in that script, because they actually have 2 copies of the Boxer Codex, so they try to translate it as much as possible to like Bisayan terminology based on how the Spanish wrote it. But most likely that was just another name that she was known by. But Sibai was, the first woman where you get the word babae. So in my opinion, what they're referring to is the first woman who created the paganito. And basically, the reason why she created that is because Pandaguan, remember, who is her son, stayed in Sulad. So this is not mentioned in the Boxer Codex. It's mentioned in other Spanish texts like Miguel de Lorza. So I mentioned earlier about the deity Pandaki. So for the Bisayans, they basically, when they did the paganito, so Sibai ordered to give offerings to the gods and goddesses, so that no one would stay in Sulad. And no one would stay in Sulad. They would go to Saad. Saad is where, the final resting place is. And in other historical accounts, such as Miguel de Lorza and Francisco Alsina, they mention that when they did the paganito, when someone died, they gave these offerings to a specific deity who was Pandaki. So they would face Mount Magyas, which is one of the sacred mountains, in the Visayas. And they would face the direction of Mount Magyas and pray to Pandaki to redeem those souls who were in Sulad, so that they would, transfer over to Saad. In my next class, I will talk about the different gods that were associated with Sulad and Saad. But basically, Magwayan is the one who Magwayan is the one who took those dead souls and brought them to Sulad. That was her job. And she would cross a spiritual river called Lalangban. And there was another god that was in, that ruled over Sulad. I'll mention that in Friday's class. And then once the living family members did this paganito in behalf of their dead loved one to the gods, to Pandaki, Pandaki would then bring those souls to Saad and bring them to another deity, which I'll talk about in the next class. So basically, it was just like this whole system between the different deities. And that's basically the end of the creation story. So any questions on the creation story? Nope. Okay. So who were the deities that were mentioned in the Boxer Codex? We kind of went a little bit over them.
Magwayan.
Linok is the god of earthquakes.
Yep. I'm gonna go back to that page. So this is actually one of them that I mentioned. That's Barangao. And they're the deity of the rainbow and one of the 3 war deities. So the Bisayans, because they went out on raids, they were very warrior culture, which kind of explains why they have 3 deities associated with war. So one of them was Barangao, one of them was Naginid, and one of them was Makburakbak. So for the Visayans, what did they believe the rainbow was? Like besides, pointing at the rainbow, which was considered a bad omen, like what did they believe like about the rainbow itself, like in terms of the afterlife?
It was a bridge to the Dewata. Was
Mm-hmm.
it?
Yep.
There's also something about this may be like crossing into the other thing, but like following it was no. You mentioned something about following it was meant would lead you to oh no, following the river. Sorry, that was something else.
Yeah, so basically, those were like it's actually written right here. So those who were stabbed to death, like either through war or whatever, eaten by crocodiles, because again, crocodiles were very sacred and they were also considered as ancestors, which is why they called the crocodiles Nuno, which is ancestor or grandfather. And those who were pierced by arrows were able to cross that sacred rainbow bridge to the Wata. And I don't know if any of you guys know, Norse mythology, but
the Bifrost.
Yes. So if you've seen, like any Norse like movie, like from Marvel or whatever, when they talk about the Rainbow Bridge, it's essentially like that, basically. So that's one of the gods. And where's that page on the different deities? And here are the rest of the deities. So does anyone just want to like briefly just like go over the different deities that were mentioned? You could read it from here and talk about it. So does anyone want to volunteer?
So Magwayan was the goddess of the sea. Was she and Captain were they were the ones that were fighting?
Yes. So,
okay, cool.
In the Bisayan creation story, for the most part, it was Kaptan and Magwayan that is mentioned in these creation stories. It's only in the Boxer Codex that mentions Malaon, who's also known as Laon. That's the variation, I guess, depending on where you are in the Visayas. But for the most part, the two deities that were the Visayan creation story was Magwayan and Kaptan, because Magwayan was the primordial deity of the sea, and Kaptan or Makaptan was the primordial deity of the sky. And in some of the texts, like the variations, these two actually married after they got into a fight. So, and if you look at it metaphorically when they married, because in other versions of the creation story, in other texts, Kaptan is the one who planted the bamboo into the sea. So just think of that metaphorically. But yeah, so they also got married. Do you want to continue on the other?
The Nog was the deity that the first man and woman went to ask if it was okay for them to get married.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Cool.
And basically, yeah. So again, in regards to Linog, Francisco is seen as the one who mentioned that it was actually a goddess. And based on what people told him of this deity, basically she caused the earthquakes through her breast, through moving, basically. So Silaki and Sibai were the first man and woman. And again, that's where we get the words for lalaki and babae. Where's the questions? Okay, so the next question is, who were the first Visayan ancestors? We kind of went over this. If you want to just go over it real quickly, again, just to refresh your memory. So who were some of the ancestors? We kind of went over it.
The first man was Silaki. First woman was Sibai.
Mm-hmm.
I guess you could also consider the crocodiles like the ancestors according to beliefs. And then there was Sibo, is that correct? The first son, Samar, the first daughter, Pandaguan, who was the inventor of the fishing net. Oh, it's right there.
Yep.
Oh my god, I'm gonna butcher this. Marancon. And
Manankon, yeah, Manankon was the one who basically was the first person who like stole something, like thievery, because he stole the pig. Yeah.
Lubluban. And then there's, oh my god, we don't know who that person is, but they married Anoranor.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot pronounce any of these. But they had Panas, who was the inventor of weapons and declared war, and they married Mangaran.
No, not married. Mangaran was his
Oh
brother.
wait, that's their
Yeah.
their sibling.
Yep.
Not bad.
Yep, it's okay. But yeah, so this is basically the early ancestors of the Bisayans and what they're known for in terms of their mythologies and like the first war, the first fishing net, things like that. And the last question. Okay, so what were some of their customs?
I'm just one of their customs was like banad piercings. So
Yep.
yeah, I was reading in the Boxer Codex that like one of the dudes just did not believe it, and he kept asking like the Bisayan to like show him their piercings, and it's like,
Yep. I think it was, let's go back. I don't know if it's there. But yeah, basically the Spaniards actually tried getting rid of this practice, but obviously they were not getting rid of it. But yeah. And this piercing is actually still found in other parts of Southeast Asia too.
oh yeah.
They only wanted to. They would practice abortions with the help of the Babaylan because they believed that you could only have one or two children at the very most for inheritance purposes. The Pangasi, is that how you pronounce it?
Yes, Pangasi. So I think it was.
They would use that as an offering for the paganito, and they would also use it for blood compacts. Whenever they made friends with whenever they were trying to make friends, they would blacken and redden their teeth. They would also file their teeth. They wore gold on their teeth.
Yep, which is this one. And they would file their teeth as well because they considered having white teeth like very ugly. So when the Spaniards arrived, they kind of considered them like animals, basically, because if you had white teeth, you were considered like lower than an animal. And if you look at other historical accounts, like there's one among the Pangasinan, they talk about the Spaniards. It's actually a passage regarding Opalaki. Basically, there was a group of Pangasinans who were, out in the mountains, and they saw Apulaki. Like it's a whole account talking about Opalaki and how they interacted with him, what he said, and things like that. But they mentioned that like Opalaki was telling them like beware of the people with the white teeth and the crosses. So basically, the Spaniards and Christianity. Anything else you want to add in terms of practices?
Buried their dead with a gold mask. The holes. They had many holes. The women wore. I don't really know if we could consider this a custom. Pomadas? Is that how you pronounce it?
Like
It
fairies.
was, yeah, it was a Spanish like term.
Yeah.
Let me find that page. But basically, one of the like pieces of clothing. Here it is. So this is kind of like what they would wear. And the skirt that was mentioned in the Boxer Codex is basically just the malong. Do you know what the malong is? I'm not sure if you know it.
Yeah, it's like the tube skirt.
Mm-hmm.
Like my mom said that like in Tagalog it's the tapis, but
Mhm.
like everyone knows it. It
Yeah.
just has different names.
Yeah, like there's different terminologies, but for the most part, everyone knows it's, the term malong, which is a term mostly found like in the Visayas and Mindanao. Let's see what else. What are we missing? Oh, there's also another custom. The tattoos.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
The women, hold on. So the women would tattoo their hands, and it was for beauty purposes, right? But the men, their tattoos, they would earn them from war or from raids.
Yeah, so like they had to earn their tattoos. Meanwhile, the women didn't really have to earn them, because basically they would wear these tattoos not just for beauty but fertility. And they kind of earned them because they were able to create life. So that's the reason why. And in terms of tattooing, another reason why they all tattooed was because of a spiritual reason. So one of the reasons that they got these tattoos was because they would not be able to pass on into the afterlife without these tattoos.
Oh yeah.
So, besides like I'll talk about this in the Bisayan deity class, but the god who rules over Sa'ad, which again is like the final resting place of the souls, he would look at not only the like the gold ornaments or like the bahandi, like the wealth that was put in these caskets, so like gold bowls, whatever, as offerings. He will look at those, and he will look at also if they were tattooed. So if they were not, they would stay in sulad. And there was also belief, in reincarnation. So after a while, you would be reincarnated after staying in sulad. And they believed after a certain amount of time, if they did not have any of those offerings or they were not tattooed, eventually they would be eaten and destroyed in Sulad. So it was kind of the reason why doing these paganito were so important, and like the burial customs are also important, and why tattooing was important as well for them. And yeah, that's about it, I think, in terms of customs. Yep. So my next class will be on the Bisayan Deities. That will be this Friday at the same time, 8 o'clock Eastern time, 5 o'clock in Pacific time, and 8 o'clock in the morning in the Philippines. So does anyone else have any questions before we leave? And then again, this Saturday, we will be hosting a Paganito ritual after Paganito class. So if you have, an altar set up, you can make your offerings, set up your offerings before then to give to the Duata, the Nito, things like that.
If we do not have an altar, can we just I hate to say this, but can we just like watch and like?
Yeah, like everyone, if you can't give the offerings yourself, yeah, you can watch.
Okay.
But like if you do have one and want to make your own offerings like in your own space, like I will be giving the offerings like throughout the Paganito ritual, like when I open it. But if you want to give the offerings, for the Duata, like in your own home, you can.
Is there something that we need to like have to do this ritual, like supplies wise?
No, not really. Like
Okay.
basically, so I will be talking about like how they historically did the paganito and types of paganito, because originally the paganito or maganito was, again, like we mentioned earlier, was to redeem the dead souls. And then over time, they created these other types of paganito. So they would make a paganito for drought, for harvests, things like that. So this one we're doing the paganito in celebration of the full moon and the duata, because this was the time when they came down to earth. And because in various beliefs, there was different layers like of the universe. So our layer is, you know, where we live, and we also live with certain spirits, things like that. There's another layer for the deities. So the full moon was considered a time when they came down to our realm. So we'll be doing the paganito on that. But basically, yeah, like if you have offerings, it could be very simple. If you want to give like a bowl of rice, you can just like set up a bowl of rice and give it as an offering. That's completely fine as well.
Okay, so we just need to bring like bring like an offering basically. That's pretty much
Yeah.
it.
Like you could set it up on your thing. Like I'll be giving my offerings when I do the paganito, and I'll basically also ask, like, you know, if anyone else wants to give their offerings to the duata, they can as well. If they want to just like show it on camera, like kind of like raise it like this, like you're giving the offering, and then place it back on your altar or whatever, you can. But basically, it's just for your own self. So you can like actively participate like virtual. Because if we were, you know, together like in physical, like I would ask like actually bring, you know, your own offerings and put them on the altar with everyone else. But because we're virtual, you know, just set it up in your own space. Yep. So does anyone else have any questions before we leave? And I'm actually going to go in the voice chat if you do have any questions as well and just want to talk. And if you don't want to speak, you could also put it in the chat box. Nope.
All right. Just making sure. What time would the paganito be?
It's the same time as it was now. So
5 o'clock?
Yeah, so 5 o'clock in the Pacific time.
Yep.
You're welcome, Naomi. You're welcome. So 5 o'clock Pacific time, 8 o'clock Eastern time, and then 8 o'clock in the morning in the Philippines. So it's going to be at night. The reason why I chose to do the class on Saturday, because technically for us, like in the US and Canada,
Yep.
the full moon is actually going to be in the morning. Like the actual time of the full moon is going to be in the morning for us. So I wanted to do the paganito ritual so that, you know, those who are in the Philippines or like in Australia, they'll be able to attend the class and do the paganito, and then within a few hours it's the full moon for them. So that was kind of the reason why I chose Saturday to do this. But yeah, so it'll be posted on the announcements as well. Okay. All right, so I guess no one else has any questions, right?
Yeah, I don't have any more questions.
All right. All right, so thank you guys for joining. And again, sorry for the delay. You know, there was technical difficulties, things like that.
No problem.
All right, let me stop this. And all right, so I'm going to stop the recording. Oh wait, someone else messaged. You're welcome, Denise. All right, let me stop the recording. 1 second.